Strings of Malice, Book 1. Snowflake in an Alley. An Old Mother Nonsense Story. Chapter 20. A Month of Flowers. It had not been one damned week, though Irinka seemed to be the only one who found it all very horrible. Maybe Nimue had actually killed her, because this was as close to Norsteresque as the mouse could ever imagine. The last few weeks had entailed being woken at midday by bright-eyed and bushy-tailed cultists. Irinka flat out refused to call them thorns, who would parade her upstairs to the twice-damned Rose's chambers. There, the woman would make a show of leaving the mouse's brother sleeping in her ridiculously humongous bed, and take at least an hour to dress up Irinka in whatever black and berosed monstrosity her minions had slaved away to craft the day before. They would then walk, arm in arm, down to the chapel, where they would find Nimue staring blankly up at the shadowy altar. The blood from the night of their arrival had been washed away, but had stained the floor an obnoxious shade of pink. Within 10 minutes, the chapel would be filled with the dark-robed figures that scuttled about like ants. The White Rose would perch herself upon the altar, and her minions would go to her, one by one, to be given a single drop of her blood, and told what she expected from them by the evening. Though Irinka despised giving the woman any credit, she could not deny that it was obviously why the woman's followers were so devoted to her. She remembered every single one by name, and she was eternally kind to them, so long as they fulfilled their tasks. Those who hadn't managed would grovel as though their life depended on it, and she would graciously allow them one more chance. None had failed her a second time, but Irinka had no doubt that to do so would not be good for anyone's health. Morning Mass would end when Irinka would be called up to pick a flower from the altar. The White Rose would take it and float down the stairs to Nimue, where she would place the flower in the woman's hair and ask if she was ready to fall into faith again. Those gathered would hold their collective breath until the White Rose had decided enough silence had passed. She would assure Nimue, and by extension her flock, that devotion had to come from choice. Irinka felt it was a lie, but it would be stupid to contradict the woman aloud. The White Rose would leave to attend to spiritual matters, whatever that meant, and Irinka had to wait while the thorns scuttled off to do their assigned tasks. She would wait, because there was always a handful which would come and gather by her absent friend. They would lay their hands on her and mutter prayers in their demonic tongue. Irinka wondered if their task was to convert her, but Nimue was too far removed to listen to them. Without fail, their prayers would end, and the rose in the woman's hair would wilt. They would slink off dejectedly, and Irinka would pick her friend up to take her to breakfast. Sometime in the second week, she had been about to encourage the woman to her feet, when her axe appeared once again in her hands. Fearing that it might be stolen, Irinka had taken it directly to her room and hidden it beneath her mattress. Considering the time, breakfast was usually late lunch. Irinka would manage to get Nimue to have a few spoonfuls before Dr. Gascares would wander down with Lunrith in tow. Outfleek had entirely vanished. There was no telling where the hound had gone, and the worst of it was, the doctor didn't seem to care even one bit. Lady Rosalind would saunter in, not long after, and feed and sip from her champion until she grew tired of speaking with the artist about magic and every famous magician, decorated mage, and legendary soothsayer she knew. They would dine on nothing but the most expensive food, half of which Irinka couldn't stomach for its strangeness, and nothing but Dedaida wine. The temple had been waiting on a delivery of the stuff only one time, and the staff had ended up a few hands short. they hadn't repeated the mistake. Once the plates were cleared, Nimue would return blankly to the chapel. Dr. Guskaris would disappear with the new head priest to spend the day intently studying the devil's tongue. Lunrith was taken up to the training room, where he was being taught, by the wrangled guardians and freshly caught horrorlings, to fight like a real Knight of the Rose. Irinka had tried to join him, but Lady Rosalind had simply said no, and that had been the end of it. Her reasoning? Naturally, that a lady had no business at all being on either end of a weapon of any sort. That was a man's affair. The mouse had defiantly watched her brother's lessons anyway, and then practiced herself, however unsuccessfully. Nevertheless, she kept her little dagger hidden in her room until she could find a moment to slip away and grab it. The routine had made it easy. Concluding the day, Lady Rosalind disappeared for most of the night. Irinka had asked a cultist, whose one and only job was to make clothes for her, what the vampire was doing, and had received a strange answer. The White Rose dedicated 3 hours a day to tormenting her still imprisoned betrayer. Before she had died, ever gracious and wise beyond her years, the goddess had given the fate of mortality to her murderer. She had done it so her thorns may study the creature and discover the way to bring her back. The brainwashed idiot had explained that it was a terrible business once Father Gekosh had taken over. His methods had been crude and cruel, and he had made each of them participate once he'd excommunicated the scientists. Now, as was only right, the White Rose could do with her prisoner as she wished. After all, a little stress relief was good for the soul. At round about midnight, if she were feeling so inclined, Irinka could find her way to Lady Rosalind's study. Lunrith would inevitably wander in, and they could sit and stare at each other. The mouse had learned, very quickly, that Lady Rosalind had confiscated the doctor's book, and would peek in on their conversation, while she sat and wrote letters to apparent hordes of thorns and friends she had all over the world, let alone the kingdom. He looked so tired, barely able to keep his eyes open after the harsh training. Irinka would eventually be sent away to hand over a multitude of envelopes to one of the thorns, usually when the artist made an appearance. She had tried to take Lunrith with her once, but the shadows had thickened with the White Rose's disapproval, and iron tinted the air when the girl had tried to insist. Her brother had hugged her, kissed her on the cheek, and sent her on her way with a gesture that she should go. The only reason she continued attending the silent gathering was because she would scarcely see him otherwise. Irinka was expected to only make herself present again when the church bells rang. The cultists would have a mass, of sorts, but Irinka was taken to bathe, and then to Lady Rosalind's room, where she would be stripped down and put into yet another black and berosed outfit by the woman herself. She had tried to resist only once. The simple threat of harm to her friends more than enough to persuade her into behaving like the perfect little doll. Returning to the chapel, the altar would already be bathed in blood, and the cultists would bow, scrape, and brown-nose hard for their goddess. Irinka felt every single one of them to be thick as bricks. Dinner would be served at 2 a.m, and then music or games or dancing, whatever tickled the White Rose's fancy that particular evening. Irinka would not say as much out loud, but she felt the woman an entitled, entirely stupid creature, whose only care in the world was the performance of her long-since lost life, and the preservation of it. As the sun rose behind the repaired curtains, they would all find sleep until noon, when they would start the charade all over again. It was all the worst kind of farce, that repeated day in and day out until the girl thought she might go mad with it. It had frustrated her to no end when their first week was up, and the Lady Rosalind, from her now usual seat in Lunrith's lap, had listened to the girl announce that it was time for them to go. Through gritted teeth, Irinka had thanked the woman for her hospitality, but insisted she now hold up her end of the bargain and send them on to Kaleka. Irinka's demands only led to the vampire leaning her head against Lanrith's shoulder and sighing dramatically. She apologized to her dear champion in breathy tones that she was not yet well enough to do as she had promised, but one more week dining on him would be just what she needed. Irinka had been so mad when her brother had simply nodded in agreement with the obviously fake declaration and scooped up the lying little princess to carry her back to their room when she claimed to be feeling tired. Irinka had screamed once the two were out of sight. She stood up so fast her chair toppled over and she ripped at the tablecloth in a fit of rage, sending everything on it to the floor with a loud crash. The table caught fire from the candles, and Thorns had rushed to put it out, while Dr. Gascares had come over to restrain the youngling, wrapping her up in his arms and petting her hair in order to soothe her tantrum, as he called it. His words were not his own when he attempted to reassure her that the rose was doing absolutely everything within her power to regain her strength, and that Irinka should be patient. His silver tongue sounded more like lead when he reminded the mouse of just how much time Lady Rosalind spent with Lanrith, who was feeding her so well that it would certainly be soon. There was nothing to be done about the slowness of their recovery. Some things just had to happen naturally. Irinka had ripped her shoulders out of the man's hands and screamed insults at both his intelligence and heritage before she stormed off to stab something. She had absolutely no desire to know what that woman had her brother doing behind closed doors, though she could just about guess from the way she bloody fawned all over him in public. The cultists thought it the cutest, happiest thing in the world that the White Rose had taken so well to the champion they had provided for her, and how she would reward them for their real loyalty. Irinka did not think that not being killed was a reward, per se, but she didn't care about them. She cared about her brother and the doctor and the priestess. She convinced herself they must be under some kind of spell to make them all so entirely stupid and useless. If this wasn't just some risk plane made to torture her, she was going to have to be the one to get them out.